Hello, for those of you who have joined us, we're going to get started in a minute. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to hear where you are zooming in from.
Welcome, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. If you've just joined, we're just going to wait another minute for a few more people. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're from and where you are today, be nice to know where everyone is coming in from.
Welcome, JL.
All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to our researcher showcase today. Today we're featuring Jared Colston of the University of Wisconsin. My name is Mary Ellen McGuire and I'm the president of PNPI. I'm joined today by Betsy Preeter, our chief of staff. And the goal of this and all of our researcher showcases is to introduce you to the work of up and coming researchers in the federal higher education policy space. I'm going to start today by introducing Jared, who will then provide us with a quick overview of his Pell Access and Outcomes Explorer tool. Please feel free to submit questions at any time, even while Jared is presenting. You can do that by putting your questions in the Q&A feature, and Betsy will ask them for you once we go into the Q&A. So Jared, welcome. For those of you who don't know him yet, Jared Colston is a PhD student in educational leadership and policy analysis at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research focuses on the intersection of higher education, geography, and mobility, with a particular interest in equity of access to education, the role post-secondary institutions play in their regional political economies, and the economies of higher ed. He's currently a project assistant with the Student Success Through Applied Research Lab and a research fellow at both the Institute for Research on Poverty and the Center for the Study of College Workforce Transitions. So Jared, welcome. We'd love to hear more about your tool.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can kind of jump into the tool. So this is just a data dashboard that was built using publicly available college scorecard data combined with data from iPads. And so I'm going to really quickly share my screen. Okay. And are we able to see the tool there? Okay, I'm seeing some nods from Betsy. Perfect. Okay, so this is the tool here. And the purpose of the tool here is we wanted to be able to see Pell access and Pell completion, along with a whole host of other variables, and be able to see those in order to determine thresholds for policy making and policy analysis, and for potential policies that might use thresholds in determining eligibility. And so what we did here is whenever you first get onto the tool, you're on the scatter plots page, and you have your x-axis and your y-axis, which you can then choose to be different variables here. As of right now, it defaults to percent Pell recipients to Pell completion rate within 150% time. And so what we could do here is we could determine a threshold and adjust this dashboard. And so what we could say is, say we're interested in institutions that only enroll at least 50% Pell, and it trims the data. And then we wanted to say only institutions that graduate at least 30% of those Pell recipients. So now we have this sample of institutions that meet these thresholds, and we can hover over institutions here and we can see their breakdown of what type of institution they are. So they're a nonprofit four-year institution. We can see their percent Pell recipient. We can see their enrollment. We can also see some financial characteristics. We see median debt of Pell students, median debt of non-Pell students, and we also see their education and related expenditures per FTE. There's a whole host of other options in this dashboard, and what we could do is we could change these axes. So one thing we could do is we could look at the horizontal axis, and these are the different variables that are available for you to choose from. So we have percentile ranks of these different Pell variables. We also have that education and related expenditures per FTE variable, and as well as median loan debt. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to very quickly swap horizontal axis from percent Pell recipients to education and related expenditures per FTE. So now we can see the association between expenditures and completion rates of Pell students. Now, this is a little bit of a skewed dashboard here because there are these outliers. What we could do, though, is we could trim this to only look at institutions that spend $100,000 per FTE. And we still see a very strong association between expenditures and completion rate within 150% time. We also see this summary table down here providing us a breakdown of this trimmed sample. And so what we see is the breakdown by sector, the number of institutions that are in our sample, the number of undergraduates that are served by those institutions, and the number of Pell students, as well as ENR per FTE. So after we explore the scatter plots, we can also filter the data here, where we could trim, even if we don't have ENR FTE as one of our axes, we could trim outliers. We could also trim outliers by enrollment. We could also look at only certain sectors. If we're interested in, say, private nonprofit 4 years, we could only look at those. And after we look at the scatter plots, we could see a much more granular institutional profile by going to the report builder. Now, what the report builder does is it provides a nice visual of who is in our sample selection. And so we see that there's some brief terminology up here talking about the number of institutions that are in our sample, serving the number of students. And it says it's the breakdown of the students by race and ethnicity, which if you hover over, gives you a more granular breakdown, and it shows your selection and then the total population. It shows the share of your selection that is minority serving. It shows your breakdown by sector and also the median debt again. And we have these thresholds again up here where we can look at, we can go back to our initial thresholds of 50% access and 30% completion. And you see that the report profile changes as you update those thresholds. You can also filter the data, and you can choose, again, only institution sector. We can also provide a geographical angle to this by looking only at certain census regions. So you can only look at the Midwest if you're interested, or you can only look at a certain state if you wanted to look at the breakdown of institutions by state. And the last thing that I'll show, because I know I'm running a little short on time here, I'm going to jump to Pell completion over time just to kind of show the final view of this dashboard. And again, this is just showing completion rates by sector over time. And then you can hover over here and see very specific Pell completion rates for private nonprofit 4-year institutions in 2017, which was 63% of the Pell students that they enrolled, they graduated at 150% time. And you can also filter these data again by Pell access. So if you only wanted to include institutions that enrolled a certain number of Pell students or a certain share of Pell students, you could do that. You can also change this from a sector view to an institution view. Now, what I've done is I've just defaulted to a random, semi-random selection of institutions. It's not completely random because I went to the University of Louisville, so I had to include them in there. But this is a selection of institutions that it defaults to, but what you can do is you can filter these data and you can select any institution out of the sample that you would like to see, and you can see their Pell completion rates over time. And again, for each of these dashboards, you can hover or you can select this eye here, and it provides a technical note on where these data are coming from, what variables are being used from the college scorecard and iPads, and what years that are represented and how those years are represented, such as academic year. So I will pause there. I think I'm at 5 minutes. And so I'm going to cut it back over to Mary Ellen and we can begin the questions.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to have Betsy take over the questions from here. I see we have one. Again, if you go in the Q&A function, you can ask a question. You can also ping on it if you want to raise someone's question to the top. And of course, the other thing I would say, I'd even encourage you, if you have a particular scenario that you want Jared to run live, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that as well. So Betsy, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Jared. Yes, please feel free to enter questions you have, even down to very specific questions you have about this tool. I've put a link to the tool in the chat as well, if you'd like to open that up at the same time. But I know Jared is here to just sort of explain how this could be useful to you in your work. So we have a couple questions. I'm going to get into those, Jared. But really quickly, could you talk a little bit more about the impetus of developing a robust tool like this and the genesis of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this originally started as sort of a brainchild of folks at the University of Southern California and individuals at the University of Indiana, Indiana University, and then also here at the University of Wisconsin, where we were interested in looking at what would a proposal that is similar to a Title I for higher education, similar to that in K-12, what would that look like? And so how can we better support institutions financially so that they can support low-income students? And so as we were going through that process, we started asking ourselves, well, who are the institutions that are enrolling the most low-income students, and which of these institutions are completing students at a high rate? And so we wanted to get a better sense of that. And so we developed this tool, and this tool allowed us to kind of look at some of these ENR per FTE associations with Pell completion rates, and we were able to identify certain thresholds that might include or exclude institutions based on certain criteria that help to inform a potential Title I policy for higher education. And so that policy is currently in the process right now. We're still kicking it around and working with some additional analyses, but this tool was another product of that, and we wanted to make sure that that was publicly available so everyone could use it to influence their own research or questions.
Thanks. All right, let's jump into some of the questions folks have. We had one question: does any of this information include work study data or statistics as well as Pell Grant status?
That's a great question. I am unfamiliar if the scorecard provides specific work study shares. I know there are work study data in the FSA data sets. As of right now, the tool does not include anything about work study. But if it's in the scorecard, we could definitely bring it in. I know that it's in the FSA, and I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, particularly when it comes to institutional expenditures and federal aid. Thank you.
Absolutely. So this might require you to bring the tool back up on screen, Jared. We have a question. Can we identify which states have the highest Pell student graduation rate? And then can we determine what type of institutions those students attended?
We can definitely do that. Let me share my screen.
Sure.
I will say that state by state comparisons are not completely conducive the way it's currently set up. But that's a great question. And I think that would be a very useful thing to add because as it stands right now, it's sort of identifying the sample and then, describing your sample given certain thresholds rather than doing a state by state comparison. But if you wanted to, what you could do, and I'm sorry, is everyone able to see the tool again? Okay,
yes.
Great.
Yep.
So if you wanted to, what you could do is you could look at this report builder and you could filter the data. And you could select certain states here. And again, I can just randomly select Illinois. And you can see the institutional profile breakdown here. In terms of the just like total state level Pell completion rate, that is not currently in the tool because the tool is at the institution level in terms of the unit of analysis. But you could look at different breakdowns by Illinois. And what you could do here is you could actually, I think that's a really great point. What I should add is just a state filter for the scatter plot as well. And then you could only see by state there. So that's a great question. Currently, we cannot do any state by state comparisons, but the data are there to do that. They're just not in the tool.
Right. So someone could put that together for you and zip that over or something. But if you were to look at a state, you would be able to determine sort of the graduation rates, and then you'd be able to look at institutional, like the sector breakdown of institutions they attended for each state.
What you can do is you could go to the report builder, and again, I'll just jump to Illinois. It reset on me. And this shows the overall breakdown by sector of Illinois institutions. And what you could do is you could look at, you only want to consider institutions that at least graduate 30% of their Pell students in Illinois. And then it would show you the sector breakdown in Illinois of institutions that graduate at least 30% of their Pell students. And as you can see, the nonprofit four-year sector is sort of overrepresented in that. And you could also change the Pell access to say only institutions that at least enroll 50% Pell students. And you see that it changes again. So
perfect.
Yeah.
And we're going to come to sort of at the end, what the future of this tool and sort of additional features you'll be adding. So we might circle back to that very question about comparing states. It's great. Another question, Jared, is the Pell completion rate lower across the board for community colleges? Is that something you could determine with this tool, or what can you sort of say about Pell completion at community colleges specifically?
Yeah, definitely. So to the extent that, public 2 years maps perfectly on to definitions of community colleges, we can certainly look at that. And one way we could do that is we could look at the Pell completion rate data over time, and we see the sector breakdown here. And so we see a persistent gap between public 2-year institutions in Pell completion rates, average Pell completion rates over time among this sector compared to other sectors here. And so we do see that. You do notice that there's like a considerable growth over time among public 2 years. And so we actually do see improvement there more so than any other sector. I actually am presenting tomorrow at a conference on similar data here, where I'm looking at growth in completion rates for Pell students over time. And between 2015 and 16, so this jump here is roughly, it's like a 26% increase in Pell completion rates among public 2 years. And so they had the largest cumulative growth over this time period than other sectors. But we do see a persistent gap between public 2 years and the other sectors.
Thank you. Okay. Sort of, again, if you have questions, put them in the chat. But Jerry, just to shift gears for a minute until some more scenarios are requested. What are ways, folks on this webinar, policy analysts, graduate students, policy professionals, what would you like to say about the usefulness of this tool for that kind of work? Do you have some specific ways you think folks could use this in their advocacy or research or, other kind of analysis jobs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this tool is really helpful for policymakers and policy analysts in particular, because so many policies revolve around identifying thresholds or kind of classifying who would benefit from a policy. And so in order to do that, I think that these thresholds or these filters that you can use are really helpful in that respect, because if we go back to the scatter plot and we can identify these thresholds of Pell completion and access, I'm sorry, that was 3, not 30. And we wanted to only look at institutions that are enrolling at least 30% Pell students, we could do that. And then we could see who among the total sample of college scorecard institutions would benefit from a policy that restricted the benefits to 30% Pell access. And so I think that is a particular potent ability for this tool, is being able to kind of define a sample that would benefit from a policy. And then you could really dive into who is in that sample from this.
Thank you. So again, you can put any questions you have into the Q&A box and we will get to them. Jared, can you tell us about sort of realizing that this data is coming from the college scorecard? Talk to us about how often it's updated. It follows college scorecard release dates, or sort of how do you maintain a tool like this?
Yeah, so the data are originally pulled in using Stata, which is a statistical software package, if people aren't familiar with that. And so it's relatively automated. And so what was nice is that actually just last night, I went in and updated the data using the most recent release of Scorecard. And so this is pretty fresh, hot off the presses data for the tool here. And what's nice about having it baked into a Stata script is that we can track to college scorecard releases relatively easily because we already have everything built in. All the formatting is done on Tableau, but all of the data cleaning and data import is done in Stata, so we can automate that relatively easily. So it's pretty live or pretty up to date as scorecard releases go.
Sorry, muted myself there. We did have another question pop in. There's one question about sort of the future of the tool, which we'll get to, but another question about who are the largest Pell Grant enrollment institutions by institution type and by state? Is that something we could explore a little bit? So thank you, Chris. The top 20 to 25 overall by institution and state in terms of enrolling Pell Grant recipients.
Yeah, well, what we can do is one of the variables in the scatter plot is percentile rank. And so what we could do is, let me just reset this here. And what you can rather than looking at percent Pell recipients by Pell completion rate, if you wanted to see the top enrollment of Pell students, we could change the vertical axis to a percentile rank of Pell recipients among all colleges. And you also see a breakdown of 2 years and 4 years. And so that changes the ranking of an institution slightly, but I'll stick with all colleges here for now. And you see this percentile ranking break down, and it also shows the percent Pell recipients. Might be a little bit, make more sense to have these swapped actually. I'm gonna put that on the horizontal axis. And then on the vertical axis. And we see a percentile ranking here. And what you could do is you could filter this percentile rank horizontal axis to only the top 25 institutions that are in the top 25 percentiles of Pell access. And then you could see the breakdown by sector. And you also see the number of undergraduates that are enrolled in these institutions. And you can also hover over these top institutions in terms of Pell recipients. Now, these are rates of Pell recipients. And so this is not necessarily matched by enrollment. So what you could do, for instance, you see that the Bell Academy of Cosmetology, LLC, is in the 100th percentile of Pell access because they enroll 10 students and all 10 are Pell students. And so, but what you could do is you could filter these data to restrict some of those smaller institutions by total enrollment. So you only want to see schools that enroll at least, let's say, 1,500 students. And now you can see these. And so you see these Puerto Rican, Universidad Ana G. Mendez Cupi campus. And you see the MECTEC, these for-profit institutions here, nonprofits. You can also filter these data to only look at the 45 institutions that are public 4 years that are in these restricted. So you could click public 4 years.
Great, that was a question as well. Can we just look at 4-year institutions?
Yeah, definitely. So whatever you click on in the summary table will filter the view that you're looking at by sector.
Excellent, thank you. Another question, would this be possible? Do you know if we could load sort of other additional information on loans or debt from the college scorecard? Is that, I don't know, we can transition into, what features you might be adding or the future of it, but is that something that you have thought about, or is that even possible?
Yeah, the loans and debt data are very interesting. We're looking at adding repayment rates of institutions. That's something that the STAR Lab that I am currently a project assistant on is working with a number of other projects. We're looking at student loan repayment rates. We are considering adding these. We briefly considered looking at certain measures that were recently released by Third Way, such as social mobility indices, adding that to where you can analyze the social mobility index along these scatter plots and things like that, or potentially looking at other measures such as the Chetty data. If anyone's familiar with Raj Chetty's work of mobility and higher education, we were looking at adding the Chetty data to this. So that's definitely on our minds. As of right now, we have just the median debt breakdown of Pell students and non-Pell students. And again, this is a median debt not of graduates, it's across the board. So this is median debt of people who have stopped out, who have not graduated, or who are not planning on graduating. This is current students. This is, all kinds. And so it does not disaggregate with those variables on types of students that are reporting that debt.
So I am going to.
Did that answer your question? I'm sorry. I want to make sure.
Yes. And I want to quickly sort of hear other features you're thinking about adding, but I do, Chris, I want to answer your final question. No, you just added another one. Okay, this question, Jared, are no loan institutions identified in this data set? So, students may still take out loans despite institutions being no loan, financial aid package institutions. Are they included in this data set?
As long as those institutions are in the college scorecard
Right.
and they are not privacy suppressed, they are included in these data. So the only restrictions that we used, we did restrict on special use institutions or special focus institutions because so many of them were privacy restricted or privacy suppressed because of their small enrollments. And because of their small crosstabs. So special focus institutions are excluded and privacy suppressed institutions are excluded. Other than that, all other institutions, as long as they are reporting to federal data sets, so if they are receiving Title IV funding, they are included in the college scorecard. And so they should be in here.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so what else, as we have a few minutes left here, what's on the horizon for this tool? Are there other features you're thinking of adding, kind of future uses, any sort of further analysis that you or your, research group are thinking about, use or doing based on what you put together?
Yeah, definitely. Just from this conversation, I'm planning on adding a state-to-state comparison tool. So I think that's a really great use of the tool. And to look at sort of batched institutional comparisons, which I know is already currently in the College Scorecard web tool, where you can compare, one institution to another. But I think that this is much more on the researcher, analyst, or policymaker side rather than the student consumer side. And so I still think a comparison tool will be useful. So we're looking at doing that. We're currently using this tool to, again, analyze the potential for a Title I policy. And so with that in mind, another feature that we're going to add to the tool is some sort of formula calculator and sort of benefit cost analysis calculator into the tool. And so what you could do is you could determine your thresholds. If you wanted to use thresholds, you can determine your growth rates that desired growth rates of institutions or something like that using change over time. You can plug that in and then you could see how much each institution might receive if, say, you set the funding to $500 per Pell student or something like that. And then it'll also spit out the total cost of a policy like that. And so that way it'll be even more helpful to policymakers because then they can really budget out what a policy like this would entail and how big of a lift it would be.
So that's if you wanted to apply a Title I type of formula to higher ed.
Right.
Yeah, so that was the initial impetus for this tool. And so it was sort of like, can we provide institutional funds or can we provide additional funds to institutions that are serving Pell students? I know there was a recent post
Just yesterday, I
about
think.
Pell-serving institutions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of getting at that as well. It's sort of identifying what an institution that is Pell-serving might look like and how might we support them. And it's really kind of narrowing in on defining a Pell-serving institution, both in terms of access and completion rate, and then developing a policy surrounding providing additional funds to these institutions. And so that's where that calculator would come in and saying, like, okay, let's get down to brass tacks. How much money is that going to cost to do a policy like that?
That's great. Thank you so much, Jared. And thanks to everybody. I'm about to launch a poll, a really quick 2-question poll, if you all can fill it out before you leave today. But just wanted to thank you all for coming to our 3rd researcher showcase, and thank Jared so much, not only for the work you're doing on this, but also for sharing it with us. The link has been in the chat to his tool. We will also make sure we send it out so you have access to it. And I'm speaking for you here, Jared, but I imagine you'd be open to folks reaching out with other questions or to talk more about what you've developed here, because I think it really has a lot of potential in our space. So I hope that is the case. You'd be open to folks reaching out.
Absolutely. I talk about this stuff all the time. So what's another conversation about it? So I love talking about this kind of stuff. So open to emails, open to reaching out on Twitter, anything like that. So yeah, happy to talk.
Thank you so much, Jared.
Yes,
and thank you everyone for coming today.
Yes, thank you everyone. Hope to see you
Thanks for having
soon.
me.